The Super Bowl is on. 70,000 people are inside that stadium. Hundreds of millions more are watching from home. Grown adults are crying, strangers are hugging each other. People have painted their faces, worn the same unwashed jersey for 7 straight weeks because it's a lucky jersey, and genuinely believe that their emotional state during the game somehow affects the outcome on the field. And then there's you sitting there watching the spectacle, waiting for the halftime show, genuinely confused about why the person next to you looks like they might have a cardiac event over a ball crossing a white line. You don't get it, not because you're cold, not because you don't understand competition, not because you've never watched a game, you just don't feel it. The thing that makes millions of people lose their minds over sports simply does not activate in you. And you've probably spent your whole life being told that something is wrong with you for that. How can you not care about sports? You just haven't found the right team, you're missing out, but here's what those people don't understand. The fact that you don't obsess over sports is not a gap in your personality. It is a reflection of a specific and fascinating psychological profile. And understanding that profile reveals something genuinely surprising about how identity, emotion, belonging, and meaning work in the human mind. Let's get into it. Part 1. Why SPORTS obsession EXISDS in the first place. Before we talk about people who don't obsess over sports, we need to understand why so many people do. Because the level of emotional investment sports fans carry is, when you examine it objectively, extraordinary. A man in Cleveland will feel personally humiliated when his football team loses. Not disappointed, not vaguely sad, personally humiliated, as if he himself failed. As if the quarterback's interception somehow reflects on him as a human being. This is not irrational. It is the completely predictable output of a psychological mechanism called social identity theory, developed by psychologist Henry Tajfel in the 1970s. Tajfel's research showed that human beings derive a significant portion of their self-esteem not just from their personal achievements, but from the groups they belong to. And when that group succeeds, the individual experiences a genuine psychological boost, a phenomenon researchers call BIRGing. Basking in reflected glory. When your team wins, you didn't win. But your brain registers something that feels remarkably similar to winning. Your cortisol drops, your testosterone rises, you feel larger, more capable, more worthy. And when your team loses, the reverse, CORFing. Cutting off reflected failure, the instinct to distance yourself from the losing group. To say they lost instead of we lost, sports fandom at its core, is a mechanism for identity regulation. It gives people a ready-made tribe, a shared narrative, a reliable source of emotional peaks and valleys that make life feel more vivid. It answers one of the deepest human psychological needs, the need to belong to something larger than yourself. And the people who don't feel pulled towards sports, who watch the Super Bowl with calm detachment, are people for whom this particular mechanism either never activated or was replaced by something else. Part 2, the 5 psychological profiles of non-sports people. Here is where it gets interesting. People who don't obsess over sports are not all the same. Research and psychological observation reveal at least 5 distinct profiles, 5 different reasons why someone might be completely unmoved by what makes the rest of the world go wild. The first profile is the internal identity builder. This person draws their sense of self from internal sources rather than external affiliations. Their identity is constructed around what they think, what they create, what they value, not which team they root for. For them, tying your self-worth to the performance of 20 athletes you've never met feels psychologically unstable. Why would I let something I can't control determine how I feel about myself? This is not detachment, it is a highly developed form of psychological autonomy. The internal identity builder has built a self that doesn't need external validation to feel coherent. In sports fandom, which is fundamentally about external outcomes, simply doesn't offer them anything their internal architecture doesn't already provide. The second profile is the intrinsic motivator. Psychologists distinguish between intrinsic motivation, doing something for the inherent satisfaction of the activity itself, and extrinsic motivation, doing something for external rewards. Recognition or belonging. Highly intrinsic people tend to engage deeply with activities where they are the ones performing. They play sports, they don't just watch them. They make music, they don't just listen. They build things, they don't just admire what others built. Watching strangers compete for outcomes you have no influence over holds little psychological charge for the intrinsic motivator. The activity has to involve them. Passive spectatorship, no matter how dramatic, simply doesn't scratch the itch. The third profile is the abstract thinker. Sports operate primarily in the concrete physical domain. Ball, goals, score, win. Abstract thinkers, people whose minds are most engaged by ideas, systems, patterns, and conceptual puzzles, often find this domain simply less stimulating than the spaces where their cognitive strengths are most activated. This is not a judgment about the complexity of sports. Strategy in football or basketball can be genuinely complex. But for the abstract thinker, the intellectual engagement available in sports rarely competes with the engagement available in their primary domains of interest. They're not bored by sports because sports are simple. They're indifferent because their brain has found more rewarding channels for its particular type of processing. The fourth profile is the childhood non-imprinter. Sports fandom is almost always formed in childhood, the team your father loved. The Saturday mornings watching games with your family. The first time you felt the electricity of a stadium. The jersey you wore to school that made you part of something. If those formative experiences didn't happen, if sports were not part of the emotional landscape of your childhood, the neural pathways that turn sports into something emotionally significant simply never formed. This is not a choice, it's developmental timing. The window for sports to become emotionally loaded closes relatively early. And for people who grew up in households where sports were absent or irrelevant, that window closed without anything significant passing through it. The fifth profile is the empathy-dominant processor. Some people find competitive sports uncomfortable not because of indifference, but because of the opposite, too much feeling. They watch a player get injured and feel it viscerally. They cannot enjoy a game knowing that for half the participants, it will end in loss and pain. The zero-sum nature of competition, one side must lose for the other to win, creates a kind of emotional dissonance that makes the experience unpleasant rather than thrilling. These are not weak people. They are people with a particularly strong mirror neuron response, a high degree of automatic emotional resonance with the states of others. Their empathy makes sports feel costly in a way that never becomes fun. Part 3. The 4 traits that set them apart. Let's get specific. Because people who figure things out alone share 4 psychological traits that are remarkably consistent across research. The first trait is radical self-reliance, not arrogance. Not the belief that they're better than everyone, but a deep, bone-level certainty that if something needs to be done, they can find a way to do it. This is what psychologists call internal locus of control. The belief that outcomes in your life are primarily the result of your own actions, rather than luck, other people, or external circumstances. Research consistently shows that people with a strong internal locus of control are more resilient, more persistent in the face of obstacles, and more likely to succeed in long-term goals. They don't wait for conditions to be perfect, they work with what they have. The second trait is high tolerance for uncertainty. Most people are deeply uncomfortable not knowing. The brain's default setting is to seek certainty, to know what happens next, to have a clear map, to avoid the anxiety of the unknown. People who figure things out alone are unusually comfortable sitting in that discomfort. They can hold an unsolved problem in their mind for days, weeks, sometimes months, without needing to resolve it prematurely just to relieve the anxiety. This is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable, because the best solutions don't come from rushing. They come from staying in the question long enough for the real answer to emerge. The third trait is deep observational intelligence. These individuals are watchers. They pay attention to things most people never notice. The detail in the corner of the room, the inconsistency in someone's story, the small pattern that once you see it explains everything. They have trained themselves, often unconsciously, to gather information constantly. Because information is the raw material of independent problem solving. The more you observe, the less you need to ask. The fourth trait is emotional regulation under pressure. When the situation is most chaotic, when everyone else is losing their composure, these individuals tend to become calmer. This is counterintuitive. Most people assume that caring about something means being emotional about it. But for independent thinkers, the high-stakes moment is actually where they focus best. The noise filters out, the options become clear, the path forward presents itself. This is not coldness, it is a highly developed capacity to separate emotional response from functional response. To feel the weight of a situation without being crushed by it. Part 4. The cost of going it alone. Now let's talk about what the research also shows. Because this operating system, as powerful as it is, comes with real costs. The biggest one is isolation, not just physical isolation, psychological isolation. The experience of being surrounded by people who cannot follow you into the way you think. People who figure things out alone often describe a profound loneliness that has nothing to do with being around others. They can be in a room full of people and feel entirely alone, because the conversation on the surface never reaches the depth they're operating at. They stop trying to explain their thinking, they stop trying to bring people along. They conclude quietly that it's faster to just do it themselves, and they're right. In the short term, but in the long term, that habit of doing everything alone, of never letting anyone into the process, creates a kind of solitary confinement of the mind. Brilliant, capable, and deeply privately alone, the second cost is the inability to delegate. Because they trust their own processing so completely, and because they have learned that other people's input often complicates rather than clarifies, independent thinkers struggle to let go of control. They would rather do something themselves correctly than hand it off and watch it be done wrong. This serves them in many situations, but it also caps them. Because no single mind, however sharp, can carry everything. And the people who refuse to delegate eventually become bottlenecks in their own lives. The third cost is that they can appear cold. The emotional regulation, the silence, the self-containment from the outside, it often reads as indifference. As not caring, as being closed off. The people who love independent thinkers often feel like they're pressing against a wall. Not unwelcome, just unable to get in. And the independent thinker, deep inside, often wants nothing more than to be truly known. But doesn't know how to let that happen without feeling exposed in a way that all their training tells them is dangerous. Part 5. The superpower nobody talks about here is something that rarely makes it into the conversation about independent thinkers. Their greatest strength is not the problem solving. It is the quality of their questions. Most people, when they face a challenge, ask, "How do I fix this?" That's a surface question. It assumes the problem is already correctly defined. It rushes toward solution. People who figure things out alone ask a different question first. They ask what is actually happening here, they question the premise. They test the assumption, they look at the situation from an angle nobody else has considered. And very often, they discover that the problem everyone has been trying to solve is not the real problem. That underneath the visible issue, there is a different question entirely. A more important one. This is called first principles thinking. And it is one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive abilities a human being can possess. It's the way Elon Musk approached rocket manufacturing, not asking how do we buy rockets, but what are rockets actually made of and why does it cost this much? It's the way great doctors approach mysterious cases, not accepting the existing diagnosis. But going back to the raw data, independent thinkers do this naturally, not because they were taught to, but because they have spent so much time in their own heads, questioning their own assumptions, that they automatically apply the same rigor to the world around them. Part 6. What they need and will never ask for. If you love or work with someone who figures things out alone, listen carefully. They will not tell you what they need, not because they're punishing you, not because they don't trust you, but because identifying and expressing needs feels dangerously close to vulnerability, and vulnerability is something their whole system is designed to minimize. But here is what they actually need. They need to be understood without having to explain themselves. Not someone who pushes for more communication, more openness, more words. Someone who learns to read them, who notices the small signals, who doesn't need the full explanation to understand what's going on. They need to be trusted with their own process. Don't try to fix the silence. Don't try to pull them out of it. Don't make the space around them smaller with noise and pressure. Give them room and trust that when they come back, they will have something real to offer. They need one person they can actually fall apart with. Because underneath the independence, underneath the self-reliance and the competence and the emotional regulation, there is a person who is tired, who has been carrying their own weight for so long they've forgotten what it feels like to put it down. They don't need many people, they don't even need several people, they need one. One person who sees through the capable exterior to the actual human inside. One person with whom the performance of self-sufficiency is allowed to stop. That person for the independent thinker is everything. Outro here is what I want to leave you with. Figuring things out alone is not a flaw. It is not a symptom, it is not something that needs to be fixed. It is a genuine and remarkable way of being in the world. It produces clarity where others find confusion. It produces solutions where others find only problems. It produces a kind of quiet strength that, in the moments that matter most, everyone is deeply grateful for. But strength and isolation are not the same thing. And the most evolved version of the person who figures things out alone is not the one who needs nobody. It's the one who has learned slowly, imperfectly, with great difficulty, that letting one person in doesn't make them weaker. It makes them whole. If you recognized yourself in this video, share it with someone who might finally understand you a little better. If you recognize someone you love, show it to them. It might be the closest thing to I see you that they've ever received. Subscribe for more psychology content every week. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and every once in a while let someone in.